At 11:15 a.m. on September 3rd, 1939, the British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain announced to the nation that a state of war existed between Britain and Nazi Germany. A long, hot summer was coming to an end for the children of South Liverpool, who lived between the munitions factories in Speke and the shipping docks near the city centre.
My name is May Orchard. I was May Wharton at the time. I was about 15, I think. It was a very, very hot year that year. It was September, and Esme and I, my young sister, we were on holiday in a tent over the water somewhere. I forget what it was. And I remember coming home on the day that, on the 3rd of September, when war was declared. And we were very brown. We'd had a lovely holiday. It was exceptionally hot. Really nice summer.
Initially, daily life continued as usual in the leafy suburbs of Egbert, and Jim had just left school at the age of 15 to start his first job in the city.
It was queer actually, because nothing happened for the first few months, and it just appeared that it was normal until the air raid started, and then we realised the war was on. I'd started work in an office in town in Liverpool. I started off as postage boy, putting stamps on envelopes and doing little odd jobs and things, and working my way up.
South of Liverpool city centre, rows upon rows of terraced houses lined the banks of the River Mersey. Ray was 8 years old when war was declared.
I know that because there was 9 on the December, and I think it was just a couple of months before. I was going to school, Matthew Arnold, and as a teacher gave it out that there was declared war on Germany, and Miss Falk, and I always remember it, F-A-L-K, that's the surname anyway.
My name's Paul King, and I was 7 when the war broke out, 1939. I was born in 32. It was a day which really meant nothing, because we were busy playing. At 7 and my sister was 11, too busy in the big estate, dens and things, and we never really bothered, except I remember playing with a lead-made Spitfire, and some other boys had these lead, just plain lead, not painted, Spitfire, and we all ran round doing this, and that's what I remember at the outbreak of war.
The British government had plans in place for the immediate evacuation of children from industrial cities, including Liverpool. Whole schools were sent by railway to the countryside, and those from Dingle, Egbert and Garston went to live with strangers in North Wales and Cheshire.
I was evacuated to Wheelock by Sandbach with my elder sister, and it was quite nice going there, but the place we stayed at wasn't very nice. It was a Mr. and Mrs. Fell with her son Willie, and we went in the afternoon to the school because we shared it with a non-Catholic school, and then either alternate weeks we'd go to the playground, a play area, and but if any parcels came, she'd open them and take the sweets or the chocolates out.
My name is Eileen McShane Gary. I grew up in Liverpool. I was born and raised in Liverpool. I was 4. My birthday is September 6th, and war was declared on September 3rd, 1939. I remember leaving in a car with my mother and a couple of other people. I think they were neighbours. I remember stopping somewhere overnight. I know we went to North Wales, and my mother and I ended up in a cottage on a farm, because I have memories of the farmer and his wife, who were an older couple, and I remember getting eggs almost every day. And I remember leaning over a fence that was overlooking a big pen and being told by the farmer to get down because there was a bull in the pen. But the cottage, as it turned out, had been condemned. It had just been opened up for evacuees, and it was cold running water, an outhouse, and I don't even remember a bus service. I'm not sure how long we were there, but we went back to Liverpool. There was a period in the war that they call the phony war, between the time war was declared and August of 1940. There were no bombings, and so everyone thought, oh, but this is not going to be much. My mother went back, much to my father's annoyance. He didn't want that. And we stayed until, we stayed right through to the May Blitz of 1941.
The phony war soon ended, when on the night of the 28th leading into 29th of November 1940, Hitler's Luftwaffe bombarded Liverpool with brute force. Over 300 men, women and children lost their lives.
The earliest I can recall, and I had slept through it really, but apparently there was a heavy explosion at the bottom of Plymouth Street in Durning Road, and it was a local college which had gone up. With the loss of life, we later heard of 160 odd people, many of them scalded to death. I can recall this hand. Now, it's the hand that really struck me, but apparently I was speaking to a cousin of mine several years later, and it was an arm apparently, but this arm was lying on the bed. I can recall this, and my mother quickly shielded my eyes from it, so I don't know who that belonged to. And Mr. Roberts, he lived in, I think, number 3 or 5 Plymouth Street, and he had 3 daughters. And Norma was one I can recall. I think she was the eldest daughter. And he was blown through the door, and he was killed, I believe. So that was the main impact it had on me. Now, that was before the May Blitz, and my mother thought, hang on a tick, they're getting a bit too close. So we were evacuated.
Eileen was evacuated with her mother to Cheshire, yet her elder sister Olive was sent elsewhere with her classmates, causing the family to be separated.
I don't remember when the war broke out. My first memory was being told that my sister Olive was being evacuated with Matthew Arnold's school, and that I was going to be going with my mother to a place called Cuddington. And I knew that my father had gone away. I only knew later that because he was in the territorials that he'd gone to fight, but I didn't know at the time. It must have been a big house because I remember that the gentleman that seemed to be in charge of us probably told us what to do and everything, wore pinstripe trousers and a black tailed coat, so possibly he was the butler. My only outstanding memory of that is that there was a very winding wooden staircase, and that at the bottom was this huge blue and white vase or urn or whatever they called it, and that it got broken. I know it wasn't me, I was such a goody two-shoes, and I know that we came back, I think it was just under 12 months, and I often wondered if it was because of that.
In the early hours of the 29th of November 1940, Fernwood Road and Birchtree Road in Aigburth were devastated when a landmine destroyed up to 18 homes and killed at least 16 people, wiping out entire families. The Wharton family lived in Gladeville Road, parallel to Fernwood, and May still remembers that night vividly.
Yes. Of all things, we were doing decorating. Mum was very good, she had it all organised. We were doing that while the raid had started, so we kept on. And it got to midnight and we were still, having cups of tea and things. And my eldest sister was in the front room. She was knitting because she had a very bad chest. She used to have asthma, and she wasn't allowed to do anything like that. So she was sitting knitting in the front room, and we were doing the hard work in the middle room, and it was going from bad to worse, and the noise was really dreadful. And I don't realise Mum was getting on then. She was about over 60, and she said she got so tired. She said, "Well, when it got to 1 and 2 in the morning, she said, I don't care how late it is or how bad the raid is, I'll have to go to bed." So she goes upstairs to lay down, and I was very, very afraid of Mum being in bed, and I was sort of, I had to get Mum. I sat on the bottom of the stairs. "Please, Mum, will you get up, because it's very, very bad." And I was crying there because I was really upset about her being up there and there's all the noise going on. Because noise is very frightening for young people. And she came down eventually. I said, "Oh, that's good, Mum." We were all in. Then my sister came in from the other front room, and we were all in the middle room when this very big explosion went. And the fire blew out, and we're all running around, and all the lights go off, all the windows went, and the noise was horrific. But fortunately, we were all together, and we weren't. And I remember seeing, Mum had a sideboard with a sort of mirrors on the high thing, and I saw it sort of sway and come back, go back again. And as I say, the fire was out, and we were in shock, of course. And we had a budgery guard on. The poor thing was on a wire, was going through the window and out again. It was making a heck of a noise. But it was the shock. But Mum was very strong. She said, "Now we're all together, and we're all right." None of us had been injured, so we were lucky.
Jackie remembers her parents talking about that very night.
My first memory was of my parents talking about my mother seeing a birdcage in the sky, and my father telling her it was silly. There couldn't be a birdcage in the sky. In actual fact, there was a bomb. It was a landmine that she'd seen, and she thought it was a birdcage with lights on it, and it landed in the road behind ours. I grew up in Gladeville Road, and the bomb dropped in Fernwood Road, just behind our house.
Though many children returned to the countryside, some families remained defiant and stayed in Liverpool.
No, but mother and father decided in their wisdom that if we were going to go, we were all going to go together. So we didn't get evacuated at all. I remember the first time you heard the plane struggling, funnily enough, and then you heard the bombs dropping. And but I don't know, it didn't touch much. You're only a child, so the morning after the raids, we go round collecting shrapnel, bits of and then we used to play for shrapnel. There was no cars in that time, so you could do what you like. I mean, in the winter we'd sledge down the street because it was right to the bottom of the street to Grafton Street. Yeah, I saw the dogfight. Now probably midday on the Mersey, and it's sort of chasing it presumably it was a Spitfire, I didn't know then. And it went towards the Welsh mountains. Now, how it finished, I don't know.
The night that I can remember clearly, my mother's younger sister was with us because her husband was in the army and she didn't have children. My dad was out firefighting and they knew that something had dropped in the entry, so my aunt went to have a look, and she came back and said there are incendiary bombs in the entry, and my mother said, well, you'll have to put them out then, won't you? And she said, with what? So everybody kept a pail of sand near the doors, and my mother said, well, use sand. So she carried this bucket of sand down the back garden path and put them out. And what I can remember clearly, my Aunt Joan came back in the house, we were in the kitchen, and my mother said, I'll make us a nice cup of tea. And then there was a thud as Joan hit the floor in a faint.
And one night, my father took my sister and I to the pictures, B42, 40, I don't know. And we watched the film, and during the film, a raid began. So the manager stopped the film and said, you quite don't go out, there's shrapnel everywhere and everything. So, oh, this is good. So we watched the end of the film, and they said he put on next week's film. But the Gak guns, do you know the Rivoli picture and Trump? Well, they were down towards, past St Charles Church, down the huge thing, but the cinema was shaking and the screen was going up and down. Anyhow, it got to about 1 o'clock, and he said there's a bit of a gap, and he lent us pots and pans to put on our heads, my sister and I and my father. And I thought it was great, with a pan on my head, walking along Aberth Road. And then I think we were still up Bark Hill Road, and then my father had to go back there, my mother to take the pans back to the Rivoli. And amazing things, but it was just quite normal. So don't throw any pans out, you might want them. True.
Kath Workman lived just outside of the evacuation zone, but she remembers with clarity how close the bombs came to her family home.
But we'd be on our way to school or we'd be on our way home and the sirens would go. And you had to dive for shelter or run all the way home, And we had a back garden, so therefore we had an Anderson shelter, which my father had to put in. And I think it was deeper than anybody else's in the neighbourhood. He never did anything by halves. And he made sandbags to go outside on my mother's brand new sewing machine, which was absolutely useless afterwards. Anyway, Dad went to the war, and when it became very difficult, you heard about the May Blitz and things like that, we didn't wait for the sirens to go. We went down to the shelters as soon as it started getting dusk. And Dad had built bunks. My brother was only 8 months old, with flasks prepared. And it was just so exciting. And my brother and I, the two oldest, we used to go to the door and stand on the steps and look up and see all the lights in the sky and the bomb, the noise and the bombs and everything. And as I've said, it was like, what do they call it, pyrotechnics? Yeah, really was. And I can remember the night that an ammunition train went off, not too far from the school that I went to. And it was horrendous, it was all night long.
The May Blitz of 1941 brought major damage and destruction to Liverpool's city centre, docks, and the suburbs north and south of the city. But resilience remained strong, and daily life carried on as best it could, no matter how bad the bombings had been the night before.
Very, very noisy, lots of shrapnel with, the anti-aircraft guns, shrapnel coming down as well. And we'd go in the morning and we'd see a lot of bomb damage and things, because it was down in the south end of Liverpool, towards the docks.
The Shoup family lived close to Mossley Hill Church, but they were treated somewhat differently to everyone else during the war.
My father came from Russia when he was a very little boy. Before, I think, as far as I know, he didn't talk about it very much, but I think all his education was here. I don't remember him speaking Russian. He never talked about it, and I never questioned it, sadly. But he was a Russian subject, basically. My father, because he wasn't a British subject, became known as an alien. Nothing to do with spaceships. But because he was a Russian subject, he was regarded as an alien, meaning alien to this country. But because he'd married my mother, he didn't get British nationality. She became an alien. So she was treated as he was, and they had to carry identification. The cards they carried were like a mini passport, which stated his origin, where he was from, where he lived, and so on. We had to register our residence, and we also were under curfew. And we had to, I'm not sure that it was 6:30 in the morning till 10:30 at night, or 6 in the morning till 10 at night, we were allowed to be outside, but after that we were under curfew. And if we weren't going to be at our official residence, then we had to register with the police before we went to tell them where we were going, and with the police when we got there to say we'd arrived. So when we moved around, the police always had tabs on us.
Although Jim was a child when war began, by 1943 he was old enough to fight, and he joined the Royal Air Force aged 18 to start training as a wireless operator, flying many missions over Europe before the war finally ended.
I was sent to Lord's Cricket Ground in London to sign on, and then I started basic training for 2 weeks, and then I went to RAF Madley in Hereford for 9 months wireless course. Well, our job as wireless operators was to listen out for any recall signals that we got, because on some raids you got a recall for some reason or other, and group used to send their messages out, and we all had to listen out to group all the time in case any messages came for a diversion or anything like that. I was stationed at RAF Methwold in East Anglia, a little village. They all got on well together, and you're more like a family together, because you're with them all the time. But you don't worry about it because you're so young. It's more an adventure than anything else. It's only when you come back and you find some of them haven't come back, it hits you. But at that age, anything's exciting, out of the ordinary. Oh, after the war, we dropped food supplies in Belgium, I think it was, in Holland. And then we took the top brass, and I think they were called Baydeckers. We used to go over the German cities that had been bombed, and they were sitting in and having a look and see what we did.
A new Special Forces unit had been set up by Winston Churchill, and Bernard Wharton was 21 when he was sent on Operation Archery in December 1941.
I think Bernard, after he'd seen us bombed out, he must have gone back. He was driver then. He volunteered for some special new thing. We didn't know at the time, we'd never heard about it, but he was training to be a commando. But of course he couldn't tell us much. It was all hush-hush at the time. And he had one leave in this new house that he'd got us. He came home and he had on his shoulder a commando. Well, we'd seen command, but we'd never, the O on we didn't know, and he never told us anything much. It was all hush-hush. And the next thing we heard, it was I can remember it very well. Mum was sat at the bottom of the stairs, and she had this letter and a telegram to say he'd been killed, and I was the only one with her at the time, and it was a terrible shock. And I remember shouting, "No, no, no," and running away and leaving her there, and I couldn't do anything about it. It was a terrible thing. He was only 21, and it said he'd been killed in action. And later we heard he was on a raid in Norway. They were doing... Norway was occupied by German at the time, and they were... I think they called it hard water or something. It was a big thing, and it was for the rockets that came over. And they had this special... he was on this raid, and unfortunately he was on the way home. They'd done the raid and whatever, and during he was hit on the temple with a piece of shrapnel or something like that, and he was okay, and he was on the boat, and he died on the boat coming home.